Welcome, everyone, to the next edition of the DFS Down Under show for round 13 of AFL action. Welcome to viewers who are watching us live on the stream here. Also, welcome to our viewers who are watching on the replay, either on Thursday or Friday, whether you're watching us here on YouTube or on Facebook on Draftstars, also on the podcast feed. Welcome to you all. Big show today. 2 games of AFL. We're back into the Thursday night, Friday night schedule. And for all of our DFS content, we head to Draftstars, Australia's #1 daily fantasy platform, offering Australian and New Zealand customers the chance to win big on AFL daily fantasy. But the man who decides who you should be looking at for your lineups on Draftstars is the Beck Hef. Good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning to you, mate. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Smatho. Thanks for having me back after the Ryan Lester debacle of last week. Sometimes I can point you in the wrong direction. So fading me is sometimes as good as following me in. How are you?
I'm very good. That was a very spicy hot take last week, and I made sure that
you made it a bit much of what it was. It was a bit of an example, Ryan Lester. Next thing you know, I've got him pinned on a bloody wall as a poster child of DFS. So let's just settle down with the clips this week. I'll find something a bit more straight bat for you, maybe.
Oh, excellent. All right, so if you do want to get a straight bet, make sure you get to dailyfantasyrankings.com.au. We use DFR for all of our data needs for AFL fantasy teams, the previews from Jesse and all of that. We are recording tonight when State of Origin's on, so if you guys want to do spoilers, you can go right ahead, but I do want to watch the game afterwards. So usually it's tradition for Hef to say, oh, someone scored. So I usually get excited and then realise that it's half time. So good luck if you are playing State of Origin, or well done if you actually won on Draftstars this evening. Mate, before we get into the footy, also we'll do a quick shout out to our golden ticket winners. Let me bring up who are our latest entrants to the AFL Draftstars live final. Here we are. Hef, Buddy Love 23, Matty 2,500, Asanke with his second ticket, Kubi, Scotty P 26, Rick Dean 39, Lurai 88, Gat Sid and Brody 23. They have secured their golden tickets to the Draftstars live final. So congratulations to those entrants. 2 thumbs up for you guys. Asked for a count the other day, Hef. We're down to 85 tickets to go.
Ooh.
So 70 tickets have been still heaps, but we are now in the 10th of June, the 9th of June now. So we are rapidly approaching a live final. All right, Hef, let's get stuck into some footy. And we're back on Thursday night. Port Power versus Geelong Cats, 7:40 p.m. start. Managed to get the exemption to fly out Adelaide. The Cats that night, currently Port a favourite at $1.77. The market is 3.5 and the total is 156.5. In team news, we don't have Orazio Fantasia. He's injured. I think he had surgery on his knee. For the Cats, there's a few ins and outs here. So Patrick Dangerfield, after his synosis, he's back. Mitch Duncan, after his concussion, is back. Mark O'Connor. Blixars, who was a late withdrawal a couple of weeks ago, he's also back. Out goes Stanley, Zach Guthrie, Jack Clark, Quinton Narkle, which is a bit of a surprise, and Max Holmes. Mate, any news on the teams front for that one? What's your first impression straight away?
First impression was what a shock it was for Geelong to have a laid out last match, but there it was. Pretty straight up and down. You say Narkle's a surprise omission, possibly, but if they're going to bring in Dangerfield's obviously going to play some time in the middle, and then O'Connor maybe indicates that O'Connor might have a bit of time in the middle of the ground as well. We know he took on that tagging role a few weeks ago, and so I think that might be a little pointer to that. Holmes is a bit like a young Mitch Duncan, so that's a bit of a straight swap. And obviously Blixar's in for Stanley. It all looks pretty straightforward to me, actually, those Geelong changes. And obviously we've got nothing to worry about there with Port Adelaide. They're a pretty settled unit, and they're rolling out a very similar side once again.
All right, so when I head to dailyfantasyrankings.com.au, I always look at the cheat sheets and the data tools, etc. Now, just give me 5 seconds as my computer's just about to crash, but let me do this on the fly. Port give up.
Let me give you a stat. Let me give you a stat while you get that up. Yeah. How about this?
Right.
Okay, from after the bye, this gets talked about every year with Geelong. Up until last year, they were 0-8 the week after the bye. So they lost 8 games in a row. And then no doubt everyone polled in. They came up against the Bombers last year in round 16 and they won by 66 points. So whether that stat actually means anything, but it's a bit of a known thing that Geelong can be a bit vulnerable after a bye. And obviously they travel interstate here too. I don't know how much weight I'm going to put into that, but it's been a thing. And it's also been a thing with Geelong in games. If they struggle to get themselves up for lower games, as we bounce around the screen there, they struggle to get themselves up for some of the lesser games. They seem a hard team to stay motivated through the whole season, Geelong. So I don't know if they'll be a bit rusty after the bye, but it's definitely a possibility.
All right, so here are my notes for this particular match. You've already given your takes here, but simpler terms, the Port give up the least amount of fantasy points to forwards. The Cats give up the least amount of fantasy points to backs. Both teams are top 3 in total possessions accumulated, so it's going to be a high fantasy scoring kind of night, this one, but the Cats are a clear number 1 for the least possessions conceded. And in the absence of Guthrie and Duncan in round 11, Geelong were outscored in fantasy points overall. So actually the Pies managed to outscore on that particular day. Let's talk about the prize pools. It's a $75,000 prize pool up for grabs, as always, in the recent kind of weeks. 7,400 odd to first place. Let's bring up the lobby and get straight into it with our ruckman here. I'm in the wrong game. Let me go back. I've had a little bit of a shocker here. Here we go. Power versus Cats. Thursday evening.
Just showing off the speed of the Draftstars lobby.
Oh, yeah.
Back to a few years ago. They've come a long way with the site, Draftstars.
They have come a long way. All right, let's talk about the ruck. So I think this is going to be the easiest position to start with because, we had Mark Levissage, who was laid out against the Pies, but he'd been in fantastic form beforehand with 129 on the 22nd of May there with an unbelievable here, 34 hitouts against Gold Coast, which are, in the end, I think it's an easy team to get a hit out against them. So he goes up against Peter Ladhams, who's come in for Scott Lycett from his suspension. And look at those 3 scores there as well. So at those particular prices, at 9,090 for 11s and 10,590 for Blixarv, it looks like some popular players coming up.
Absolutely. It's very easy to play both of them, as you mentioned. Little word of warning, because we sort of get a bit carried away with Blixards when he's named in the ruck. He's almost a lock because he goes from that, unfriendly fantasy role down back to just running loose on the ball. You see he had tons in 2 of his last 3 matches. A little bit concerning that game against St Kilda when he only had the 59. I'm sure he let a lot of people down that day. And 129 in the ruck against Gold Coast. Well, that's not really anything to write home about with the Gold Coast ruck setup. Zach Smith hasn't exactly set the world on fire since he's returned for them. So obviously a good play. Blixarve, not rolled gold, which is a term that I would use to describe Pete Ladhams. He's a guy that's been on my radar for a couple of years. It's an interesting spot there. They've got Scotty Lycett, so he doesn't get much of a go when Lycett's there, but look at those scores when he's the main man in the ruck, Ladhams. One of those was against Brodie Grundy as well, so he's not just beating up on some weaker teams. 95 there against Grundy's excellent effort. I think Ladhams is as close to a lock as there is in this game. It's up to you whether you play him in the ruck or you use him up forward. You've got options here because you've got Blixarves you can play as a defender or in the ruck. You've got Radigalia, who, interestingly, you look at the centre bounce work, they are giving Radigalia most of those centre bounces, and then they sort of let Blixarves roam around a bit more and Radigalia will push forward. But 9,000, it doesn't really grab me that much. But you've got 2 excellent options here, and Ladhams is clearly the pick for me.
Yeah. Probably a suggestion that the double ruck stack will be popular. I wouldn't fart to say to go the triple ruck stack. I don't think if Radigalia was, say, high sevens, low eights. Yeah, you seriously consider it. But
Port do have some tall timber. Well, they're going to need some tall timber because they've got to deal with Hawkins and Cameron, but yeah, they're not an easy team to score against Port, so it's not an easy matchup for Radaglia.
All right. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to do Laddams as my ruckman and move on to the defence, and I'm going to click on Blixar straight away. So it's just too good to give up for me. So let's talk about other backs options that we could do here. Now, this is kind of a neutral matchup for the Cats, where it's a tough one for the Power. As I mentioned before, the Cats just don't give up fantasy points to the backman, whereas the Port are not too bad. So what are your thoughts here on the backline for either team here?
Yeah, generally the hardest team in the comp to score a bit against for the backs is Geelong, but you did mention last game Collingwood got into this real mark kick sort of style that Collingwood can do. Port Adelaide have got a little bit about them that they can chip it around the back line, but I don't think quite to the Collingwood degree. I'd be leaning to playing a couple of Cats backs here, which is an argument for playing Laddams up forward and Blixarves in the ruck. I know you've gone the other way here, Smatho, but that's just something to think about. Tommy Stewart is always the man that we talk about for Geelong. 13,000. There's not much meat left on the bones there. An interesting one I want to talk about in the back line, though, is Mark O'Connor, which we mentioned him in the ins. Go and have a look at those numbers there. Actually, that 28 was affected when he did himself a mischief during the game. He wasn't going that well at the time from memory, but those other games there, 8,810, they're huge scores for that $8,000 price tag. And I think we know they all jumped on a plane to try and recruit Travis Boak a few years ago, Smatho, so I'm sure they haven't forgotten how good a footballer he is. If I had a gun to my head, I would be thinking that O'Connor is going to go to Boak. So I think that's a plus for O'Connor playing that tagging role in the middle of the ground, and obviously that would be a minus for Boak.
Excellent. All right, so Mark O'Connor is in my side here. Let's talk about other options here. I've got here Dan Houston, 11,780, and Darcy Byrne-Jones as the key players for the Port backline. Any thoughts on these particular two? To be a little bit contrarian, I guess.
Yeah, well, Houston's a little bit cheaper than what we've seen. I think that's stemming back to that shoulder injury he's got that's sort of taken the wind out of his sails a little bit, but you see there his last game there against Freo with a 97. A week off to get over it. I think he's quite well priced, actually. Houston, he'd be my pick of the Port defenders. Then you got Lachie Jones. Looks like he's from another era, but in there you can scroll all the way down for Lachie Jones, 7,000. He's shown a fair bit for a first-year kid. He's pretty well built. Very hard matchup against Geelong, but he'd be one of my favourite cheaper options.
All right. I'm going to come back up here to Mr. Henderson, who has had great form here at 9,810. I find the Port Power, I would say forward line, to be a bit mischievous, if I call that a word. I think there's a good spot for him for intercept marks. Clearly, he can go double digits here at 11, 10 marks in his couple of games in his Gold Coast. So if Port decided to play a long kicking into the 50 mark, I think Henderson's right in there. Tom Atkins is in there as well, but I do like
Henderson does seem to have the better ceiling than Atkins. So, yeah, of those two, we've spoken about the changes you need to make when you're trying to win these things rather than just get into the money. On that basis, yeah, I could see going Henderson over Atkins at that similar price.
Now, speaking of big money, we move on to the midfield, and I started typing up notes for the old Guff pick, but unfortunately he was ruled out for this particular side. So that leaves Tim Duncan at 17,760. Now, obviously, we talk about ceilings. He has the biggest ceiling in the game, but can we get up to him? Is there enough value for him to squeeze him into our lineups, Hef?
That's pretty expensive for me. I would prefer. I'd be leaning no at that price, but it's Mitch Duncan. He's flying this year.
All right, let's talk about Patrick Dangerfield off injury. like he's already come out and said that he's probably TOG will be limited after his injury. Another one that we could safely ignore.
I don't know about ignore, but I won't be piling into Dangerfield. You know, Dangerfield's always well owned, especially when people see him with that 14,000 price tag. So that's another reason for me to not be too enamoured with him. I definitely don't want to fade him completely, though. It's I don't think they'd be bringing him back unless he was ready, because they're not going that bad, Geelong, and they'd be firmly focused on having everyone right comes finals time. So I think he'll be ready to go. I think it'll be a pretty contested match, which he thrives on. He has had some really good games against Port over the years. So, I think he's definitely playable. I just don't – I tend to always be under on Dangerfield, especially at this stage of his career, that the amount of times he goes really big has sort of dropped off a little bit the last couple of years.
Yeah, look, I'll be shocked if he gets over 75% of CBAs. Let's be honest. I don't think they're going to throw him in there straight away. He'll lurk up through the midfield, might come up through the wing, but let's just have a look at it this week. But the guys who I want CBAs, obviously the old brigade here, Joel Selwood at 13,540 is on my radar here. 98 versus the Pies and 134 in the game before versus the Gold Coast. Thoughts on this brigade down here with Selwood, Higgins, Smith, Menegola, and Parfitt tend to be rotating through the midfield.
Well, they have given the keys a bit to Parfitt the last few weeks. I think that'll be impacted a fair bit here from O'Connor and Dangerfield. But Narkle was another guy getting a lot of centre bounces. So, I think they'll come down for Parfitt, but they won't disappear. I prefer Sean Higgins. I think Higgins has really started to hit his straps in this Geelong midfield. I was amazed how badly he started the year. But he's got a bit of a combination of some centre bounces, some wing work, some half forward. He's proven himself as a scorer. He's got a great ceiling at 12,900, and he's just a good footballer. So I'm really happy to have Higgins there. The gloss has gone a bit off Isaac Smith. He's around that same price tag. It might not be the worst time to get Smith into your team. You see that run he had around the 100 mark. Probably burnt a few people the last couple of games. A little freshen up for the old body. He's a guy who's still pretty nicely priced as well.
Let's touch on Port Adelaide before I fill out this midfield. Now, obviously, you talked about Boca already that could cop some attention from O'Connor, but got a couple of comments here in the chat about Mr. Oliver Wines here. It's 15,030. Jamie suggests it's nighttime wines. I'm sure there is some day and night stats that the chat could be able to let us know that Ollie Wise seems to perform better under lights. Mark loves him, a little wine, little emoji in there. Yes, we are picking Port players as well. And just find out that I'm actually going to have some Port players in my side here. Yeah. So let's talk about Port Adelaide. Start with Ollie Wines. What are your thoughts on his selection in my team?
Well, we've always been scared to play guys against the Cats, but one spot we have been happy to play is the actual proper gun midfielder, because before O'Connor they didn't used to tag, so you didn't have that worry, and they're a little bit gettable, I think, in the middle of the ground in that contested situation. They're getting a bit older. Wines, I think, stands out because I think they'll tag Boak. If they tag Wines, then the situation's flipped. But I think Boak's probably a little bit more damaging. Wines just going to be in there tackling, accumulating. I think he's clearly the standout. If you want to go down through a few of the others. So I don't think it's such a great spot for Amon being an outside ball getter. Some of those scores are amazing from Carl Amon. Like, who could have seen this coming? Not me. He's in great form, but I don't like the matchup for the outside runners. I like it more for the Bulls. So even though a guy like Pau Pepper, who seemingly squeezed out of the centre bounce rotation last time, he's still in pretty good form, Pau Pepper, and I think this is more of a tough, bruising, battering contest that he's going to like as well. I think Wines, though, is clearly the pick for me, just with that O'Connor tag in the wings for probably for Boak. Willie Drew comes in all right too. I reckon it's probably a suitable game for him around that $10,000 mark. I'd probably lean more to a guy like him, even with that 48 staring you in the face.
Yeah. looking at the CBAs early today on DFR, I found that William Drew is still attending a lot of CBAs. You talked about Powell Pepper. He's now more of that pressure forward. They want to invent him. He scored 3 goals against Freo. I think that inflated his score a little bit. So I'll be a bit mindful with him. I do like Drew. I do like... You might have to talk me. You've taught me off Carl Amon, so I might come down here to Joel Selwood.
One thing last about Powell Pepper, actually, he lost a lot of centre bounces to Amon against Freo. I reckon that might flip back up against Geelong. Just an inkling I've got there. Amon, it might be used more out on the wings.
I'm going to put in Sean in. I'll put in Dan Houston for now. I want to get away from ownership.
You don't want Wines.
Better score.
The chat's going to ride if you don't put Wines in, Smatho.
We
can save some money up forward. We've got Laddams on the way.
Yes, we do have Laddams on the way. So let's click this button here. The forwards position. Let me go straight away. Let's click on Laddams. No, actually, I won't click on Laddams because it's just going to give away all the options that I could do. So talk me through some of these, obviously, premium options first. We've got here, obviously, Danger. We talked about Higgins, Smith, Parfitt, Powell, Heffer, Zach Tui. Go ahead, come down here to Tom Hawkins at 10,830. Is he a play?
I think he's worth sprinkling.
He's worth sprinkling?
The thing about Port is that they got Tom Jonas down back. He doesn't usually want to go on the big brute forward, so it'll be interesting to see who they plonk him on. One guy you sort of missed over there was Zach Tui. Interesting that he's selected as a forward here. If you are looking to play a backline stack for Geelong, then I think you can make a strong case for including Zach Tui in your forward line because he has gone back the last few weeks. He's putting together some pretty good scores. He has been in some good spots, considering who the Geelong Cats have come up against. But he's been taking some kick-ins, and I think he's a really good option to link if you are using a Geelong backline. The other guy that I sort of don't mind at a cheaper price is, as a flyer, is Connor Rosie, who's not going overly well, as you can see there. But they have been talking about trying to get him in the game, trying to get him through the midfield a bit more. I think around that $9,000 price tag. He's got a bit of pace, which could serve him well if he gets up into the game against the Cats here. And has been carrying a little niggle. I think the bye would have helped him, Rosie. So I think he's a guy that people might be getting a bit sick of, and that that's the time when I like to start playing up, Smatho.
All right. Let me finish this slide off there. So there goes Laddams. Oh, there we go. Connor Rosie. I think you've talked me into it. There we go. Little GPP flyer there. So there it is. I didn't have Ollie Wines to start with. Let's be honest, I did add a bit of a different lineup, but you've talked me into a couple here. So take the screenshots. Oh, they're good to go. Any changes that you want to make in your particular slide if you're building one?
No, I talked you into the guys I wanted.
Very good. All right. Let's move on to this next match, which is on Friday night, Sydney Swans versus the Hawthorn Hawks. This one's a 7:50 p.m. start on Friday night at the SCG. Currently, the Swannies are favourites, pretty short, $1.15. The line's at 32.5, and it's 157.5. As you're probably aware, the forecast hasn't been great along the eastern seaboard of Australia at the moment. Rain's been persistent in Sydney all week. It probably will clear by Friday night, but make sure you check the conditions before finalising your teams. As we're recording this show on Wednesday, we don't have the teams as of yet, but I have dug into the news from both sites. Not really much injury news at the Swans. They came out with a clean bill of health against the Saints. So if there's any changes there, they're probably from a match committee point of view. For the Hawks, they come off the bye. They do get Jaeger Amira back from his concussion. He'll probably line up. Sean Burgoyne has also been missing, so he might be in line for a game as well. Jack Gunston, however, is still suffering from spasms in his backs, and he's questionable to play in this particular match. More borderline unlikely. $75,000 contest on Draftstars is available for this particular contest. Before we get into the particular contest, get on to dailyfantasyrankings.com.au. Hit the data tools section. look at all the cheat sheets and also the tools that you need for your particular lineups. And here are my notes for this particular match. Swans are the second worst in the league in overall and fantasy scoring against. So we talked about the previous night. The Cats were number 1. Now we've got the Swans at number 2. The Hawks in the last 5 have given up an average of 5.2 tons per game. So you can junk it up here against the Hawks. Hawks give up the most fantasy points to premium mids, and the Swans are number 1 for tackles in the league. So, Hef, your initial thoughts on this particular matchup before we get into some plays?
Well, thank Christ for Hawthorn. That's my initial thoughts, because the way they've done the roster this year, the floating fixtures and whatever else, and we've had a lot of really good matches for Thursday and Friday nights. It's been a pretty hard slog in terms of DFS, and now we've got the Hawks come to save us. We can actually play some guys with some confidence. We know the Hawks have given up a lot of points, and interesting though, the Swans SCG record flimsy. And whenever there's wet conditions, like the thought of the Swans is hard and tough and disciplined and all that sort of stuff. But they've been a bit susceptible in wet conditions as well over the years. So I don't think it's the best setup for them by any stretch. And obviously Hawks have had the week off. They might come out and surprise a few people. I'm sure the Swans are quite heavily fancied in the market.
All right, let's have a look at this particular match. $75,000 contest. We always start here in the rucks, and there are a couple of cheap guys that have been playing the last couple of weeks that have impressed. Obviously, first of all, Joel Amadi at 7,540 had a brilliant game against the Saints last week with 74 fantasy points. He's there at 7.5. And then old big Ned Reeves, tallest player in the comp, I think he is. Obviously, he also impressed in his last game before the bye with an 81 fantasy point there. Now, obviously, if they are selected, do we look at these particular guys, or do you think, maybe we're not so convinced so far?
I would like you to scroll up a little bit, Smatho. First of all, we'll just make mention that Reeves has taken that number 1 ruck mantle from Big Boy. We know they had the Big Boy experiment down back last year, and it just didn't really end up working because Segler just hadn't been good enough. But they've given the keys to Ned Reeves, and he's been quite reasonable. So you see there the hit-out numbers have dropped for Big Boy. He's still getting a bit of run through there, but he's got that sort of backline role as well. So it makes me want to steer away from McAvoy. But Tom Hickey's almost the story of the season when it comes to most improved players. He's just been, not only has he been really consistent, but he's been bloody hard to score against. If you look at the numbers over there on daily fantasy rankings, he's actually, is he the second hardest? He is the second behind Max Gawn. It's always been Gawn and Grundy. This year it's Gawn and Hickey, which is just absolutely ridiculous. But and he does do quite well against the really big rucks too. Hickey's a big man himself. I love Hickey in this spot here. He's my clear top pick.
He's a bit of a mudlark as well.
I don't know if I describe him as a mudlark, but he is tough. He's a big Neanderthal, Hickey. So the bad conditions doesn't seem to worry him at all. He just seems like a really safe option here to me. I reckon he might bash up Big Reevesy. Amadi looked like a young Adam Goods last week. He was everywhere taking marks. Wet conditions would maybe slow him up a little bit, because I think Hickey, you see there, he did get 9 hit-outs. Amadi, he's a little bit undersized for the ruck, so he's it's not going to be a whole lot of fun for him going up against Big Boy as the second option for Hawthorn rather than last week against St Kilda, where he was up against probably Battle or someone like that. So it might be a bit harder for him. And, that's worried me. What's going on with Hickey's knee? We've been worried about that for weeks, though. Didn't he do a PCL and he was back the next week?
He was back in 1 week.
Yeah.
So obviously, look, credit to the Sydney injury staff there. But in terms of your rankings, you clearly have Hickey on top.
I love Hickey.
Segler 2, Reeves 3, and then probably Joel at 4.
No, Segler, is he even playing, Segler?
No, he's been playing 2s.
No, I don't have Segler in there. I'd probably go, Marty 2 just because he's cheaper.
Yeah.
Reeves 3, Big Boy 4. Actually, I can't forget this game Big Boy played at the SCG a couple of years ago because I made him captain in one of my season-long leagues, and he scored 33 here against Callum Sinclair, and I lost somehow. But how a guy could get 33 soul rucking against Callum Sinclair is beyond me, but it's going to hold demons this game for me and for Big Boy. I'd have Big Boy 4 at that price with that role, but I'm not getting past Hickey very often. Amati can play as forward. I'd prefer to go with the double rather than Amati.
Oh, fair
and
enough.
Adam's just worried me about Hickey. If I've missed something, I have to do some research. But sticky tape together and send him out there.
All right, let's move on to the backs. Now, the guy on a stroll down straight away, he's going to be very popular. He's finally getting into some form because year after year I've been playing this guy. I've had him in my season long. I've played him in DFS, and look at the numbers that he usually comes up with. But look at those last two scores. This is Mr. Harry Cunningham at 9,920. Great matchup, this one against the Hawks, coming off a 99 against the Swans, 115. Probably the only concern is the weather. If you can see there, 9 marks against the Saints and 10 marks against Carlton. So for now, if he get dry conditions, I reckon he's one of my key players. But question marks remained, I suppose.
Yeah, I do like it. It was a good spot for him last week. He was quite an easy play, but Hawthorn aren't as leaky this year against the backs as what we've come to know, and especially with the key backs, which was just an absolute goldmine the past few years. It's not so much the case this year, but compared to Sydney, it still is. Sydney have been just an absolute disaster trying to play backs against. So I'm leaning to Sydney. You've got Cunningham. If you want to pivot off Cunningham, Ramp, he's a pretty reasonable option himself. He doesn't quite have the upside of Cunningham, but he's pretty safe. You can obviously play Lloyd. Actually, these guys, they played last year in wet conditions, I think, and Lloyd and Mills really junked it up. It does ring a bell, actually, that those two were a really easy play to pair to each other. This was before Mills turned into the next sort of Darcy Parish and just sort of racks up every week in the midfield. Obviously, you can play Mills through the midfield there and link up all three of them. That's going to be pretty popular. It's probably a good way to go about it as well.
It is a good way to go about it. I'm going to go straight into Lloyd here. Before we move on, is there anyone here at Cheap GPP Flyers that we could take a stab at?
You'll need to scroll down a little bit. I don't really like any of these cheap guys, to be honest. I think it's a good spot to spend up, but I think the midfield is as well for Sydney. So you're going to have to find some cheaper options somewhere. I think by using one of Cunningham or Rampy will give you enough cash for the rest of the ground. Hardwick's just signed a new contract, so that's usually a bad
shout out to Hardwick. It's the contract game. Usually when they sign a contract, they go like crap. So you just be wary of Blake there.
Yeah,
George Dawson's also not a bad option there as well. If you can't get to, say, Mills or Lloyd.
He does have that upside, Dawson. So he's a bit riskier, but he is the type that can win you a contest.
All right, let's move on to mids. So far we've got a bit of a theme of Swans, and again, I'm not real keen on rostering Hawthorn options, but let's start there. Tom Mitchell at 15,500, back at his old game. I wouldn't call it a revenge game, but he's back at the old ground he did have his youth at. Jaeger O'Meara will be back at 13,810, Shields at 13,000, and Chad Wingard at 12,555. Reasonable prices, I guess, but it's a horrible matchup.
Well, yeah, they have been hard to score against Swans. The one thing they do give up is contested possessions. So those guys that you mentioned there, Mitchell obviously is, well, he can get uncontested as well, but he's usually at the coalface all game long. So, yeah, I think he's in play. I think Jaeger O'Meara, I don't really like playing guys off concussions. It seems they don't seem to come back with a bang. Like, it seems a good spot to play him, O'Meara, because he's sort of that contested style. My favourite player for Hawthorn is probably Warple, it's a little bit concerning because O'Meara comes back. It may affect his time in the middle of the ground, but he does fit that sort of that contested style of midfielder that I'm looking for against the Swans, and at least with Warple, you're getting him for a pretty good price. You see, there's not many scores there that are really killing your team at 10,000. So he's probably my favourite option. And if they do use him in a tagging role, which they have from time to time, just to have him around the ball, I think that's a really good spot, and especially if it's wet, because it sort of seems to suit Warple. And when you look at him at the same price as a guy like Tom Phillips, I think it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, no, I think it's a no-brainer. Popular, but if you can get just 80, 85 and hit a ceiling of 100, and then, yeah, you're on your way, considering that you do need to select a Hawks player in your teams here. Let me scroll back up to Swans options. We've touched on Callum Mills, Luke Parker at 13,590. Uber consistent. Josh Kennedy, 12,680. Uber consistent. Even Rowbottom at 10,770. He's building as well after 115 back at the early in the month. Popular players coming up. But is there any ones that you really want? Yeah.
Can tackle. Really. Is getting a lot of time in the middle of the ground. 80% last week, centre bounces. So they're all good options. Can't really pot any of those guys. In terms of looking for cheaper ones, if you scroll down, we could probably find there's McInerney is starting to hit his straps a bit. He threw in a little 100 there a few weeks back. Georgie Hewitt's gone down back. So if you're looking for some real cheap work across the back line, you've got Mills and Hewitt here in the midfield that you can sort of link up as well. So that's something to think about. But geez, it's hard to really knock out. I've never been a huge Ollie Florent man, but it's hard to knock anyone coming up against Hawthorn at the moment.
No. I'm going to go Florent. I'm going to go Rowbottom, and I'm also going to go. I think I might go the fade on Mills. It's probably going to be detrimental to my lineup, and Parker as well. I'm going to come down to Josh Kennedy, especially if it's a little bit wet. He'll tackle it up. Yeah, former side as well. Yep, I like that. Any other comments on the midfield before we move on?
No, you can move on. You can play all these sorts of guys.
Yeah,
I don't mind Kennedy.
All right, let's move on to forwards, and obviously the key here is if you look at the market, it's a 5-goal line. So you pretty much want to be Swans heavy, and this one is particularly as well. Players such as like Isaac Heaney at 11.2 and Lance Franklin at 10.8 are going to be pretty chalky, but also pretty popular. But you might need to find a flyer here to get yourself contrary in this particular lineup. So, yes, we can say Heaney or Franklin, but who's your flyer as we scroll down this list here?
Yeah, you definitely want a lesser owned option somewhere, and this might be your chance to take one on a risky forward, like a Will Hayward, a Tommy Papley, a Sam Wicks. They're all guys who can score over 8x compared to their salary. Like Wicks coming off a shocking week last week, but his earlier form this year, he can hit the 100. So yeah, you want to. I think this is a great spot to take a guy that's probably a little bit under-owned, like a Hamish McLean or something. Like this is a great spot just to throw it out the window and find a guy that every once in a blue moon he can get you a big score, and just say, well, there you go. Imagine he spikes the 108. There's your difference over everyone, McLean. So yeah, that's my that's the way I want to attack it. Like a Marty's obviously the cheap guy that stands out, and like it's probably going to be a really popular combo going something like Heaney and a Marty. But I did mention a couple of reasons why you might be able to cool off on a Marty and go with someone else. But it's hard to play a Hawks forward. There's a couple of cheaper guys who might pop up, but they're just not going to get the opportunity, are they?
No.
Unless you're going total contrarian and going on this SCG wet conditions, might find out the Swans and the Hawks are off the bye with a bit of freshness in the legs, and you want to definitely go contrarian. But if you're looking at things, especially in like a single entry contest, then they're the obvious guys, those Swannies.
To complete my side, I am going to go, for now, I was hot on Lance Franklin, and I'm still are. I suppose it's going to cost me a couple of injuries, but Isaac Heaney seems to be more adaptable in the wet. If it's wet conditions, I'm going Heaney. If it's dry, I'm going Franklin. For now, I'll do Franklin, and then I'll also get into. I've got a selection here: Reeds, Wicks, Hayward, or Papley, and I'll put in Papley there for now. So
that's a pretty solid lineup, that one, Smatho.
Look, it is an 8-1 stack, but as I said, the tools suggest that the Hawks are not a great fantasy team unless they get on a roll. But the Swans are not. The Swans won't let them. If it was a neutral matchup, sure, you have a balanced lineup, but this matchup means that you need to play some Swan players on Friday night. All right, Hef. Cracking show as always. Thanks for all the viewers and listeners for tuning in. Round 14 next week. We've got another 2 games. Only 5 games over the round next week. So we've got 7 this round. You're actually going to catch me on location next week, Hef. I'm on the plane again. Yes.
Where are you off to this time?
Shout out to all of our Western Australian viewers. I'll be in Perth.
Oh, it's as if they're letting you in.
So looking forward to going to Perth. I haven't been there in a couple of years, so looking forward to get over there. But I'm also looking forward to catching up with everyone on the next edition of the DFS Down Under show. Once again, thanks for all of our viewers and listeners. Thank you, Hef, for all your insightful comments.
Thank you. See you next week.
We'll see you next week. Thanks much. Catch you later.